The international community, including our allies and partners, has to step up before another attack.
Stepped up battle. The U.S. to send more attack helicopters and military advisors to Iraq in the fight against ISIS. Quite a show. Images related to climate change are projected onto the facade of St. Peter's Basilica. Mercy pilgrims. We join a group trekking to the Vatican to pass through the Holy Door in a rite of sacred pilgrimage. And Pearl Harbor remembered. An American hero shares his story of survival on a day that lives in infamy. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, December 9th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. We are at war with ISIS. Secretary of Defense Ash Carter makes that clear again today. He testified before a Senate committee on the U.S. strategy to defeat the terrorists. Chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn reports.
In a tough grilling, Secretary Carter did tell the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations that we are winning the war. However, he did say that our Arab partners could do more to help in the fight. He confirmed that the U.S. is poised to donate helicopters and special advisors to the region, and he complained that Republicans are holding up $116 million to fund a train and equip program. Now, in response to a direct question from Senator McCain on whether he agrees with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff about ISIS not being contained, Carter seemed to contradict the president, who has recently said that the war with ISIL is contained.
General Dunford, we have not contained ISIL. Mr. Secretary, do you agree with General Dunford?
I agree with what General Dunford said, yes.
ISIL is no longer in control of 25% of the populated area that they previously had taken over. That is evidence of ISIL being contained in Iraq and in Syria.
Senator McCain says we are losing the war and that we need to do something quickly. He suggested several thousand boots on the ground. Lauren Ashburn at the White House.
Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Investigators learn more about the suspects behind the terror attacks in Paris. They just identified a third gunman who targeted victims in the Bataclan concert hall. French police say the suspect's mother learned about his death when she received a text. That text led police to the suspect's family, and a DNA sample confirmed the link. The suspect's brother now also faces terror-related charges. The FBI reveals the suspects blamed for last week's terror attack in California were radicalized at least 2 years ago. That was before they began dating online.
They were talking to each other about jihad and martyrdom before they became engaged and then married and lived together in the United States.
The FBI director says the couple was inspired by foreign terrorists, but it's not clear if their marriage was arranged by the terrorist. The Senate overwhelmingly passes and sends to President Obama a massive education bill he is expected to sign. It returns to the states significant control over school accountability and testing. This bill bars the federal government from mandating specific academic standards such as Common Core. Well, negotiators are running out of time for reaching an agreement at the climate talks in Paris. They hope to have a deal by Friday. The current draft of the plan leaves a lot of unanswered questions. Money, of course, is a problem. Should developing countries help pay for poor countries to cope with climate change? Pope Francis could weigh in if the talks reach a stalemate. Well, it seemed a bit odd, inappropriate to some, but St. Peter's Basilica was seen by the world in a different light Tuesday night. Hundreds gather at St. Peter's Square Tuesday night for an environmental light show projected onto the facade of St. Peter's Basilica. The display was put together by a coalition of philanthropists and environmental foundations. They're marking the climate change talks in Paris on the opening day of the Jubilee Year of Mercy. The project, called Fiat Lux, Illuminating Our Common Home, was displayed a few hours after Pope Francis opened the Holy Door of Mercy, launching the Jubilee. It featured images by National Geographic and well-known photographers. similar to those used on the United Nations headquarters and the Empire State Building in New York. Pope Francis issued his landmark encyclical Laudato Si earlier this year. He faults a fossil fuel-based economy for impoverishing much of humanity and harming the planet. The National Catholic Register's Ed Pentin joins us from Rome tonight. Ed, that show is provoking some criticism. What are the critics saying?
Well, Brian, first of all, a lot of people liked it. They liked the fact that it showed the wonder and greatness of creation and the importance of safeguarding creation, which is what it was intended to do in some ways. But there was a lot of criticism about the fact that it was being used by certain groups to promote the science of climate change, which is obviously very contested by certain people. And then there was also the problems of the fact that there was no real Catholic imagery used in the show, and also the fact that it was really projected onto a sacred object, one of the most sacred objects in the church, St. Peter's Basilica. So people thought that was kind of sacrilegious.
Yes, and on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception as well. Ed, why is the World Bank's participation in this project problematic?
Yes, well, that's an important point because the World Bank is a promoter of contraception and abortion, has been for many years, and that obviously is problematic when you've got someone like that, an organization like that, backing this show. So that's another factor. But yes, as you say, the fact that it was on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception is a very important factor as well. Somebody said, you know, it's praising and sort of worshipping Mother Earth, whereas the Church should, of course, be venerating Mary, the Mother of God.
But because of the world focus on St. Peter's, that great iconic figure of the Catholic Church, was this an opportunity for evangelization?
Yes, it was, Brian. And, you know, it was a chance really for the Pontifical Council for the New Evangelization, which was behind this project, to really use this as a teaching moment and to sort of discuss the story of creation from a Catholic perspective. So in many ways, it was seen as a lost opportunity in that respect.
Ed Pentin joining us from Rome tonight. Thank you, Ed.
Thanks, Brian.
And Syrian rebels evacuate one of their last strongholds. The city of Homs was once called the capital of the revolution. It's now returning to government control. Hundreds of fighters and civilians started pulling out of that city today. The evacuation process, overseen by the United Nations, is part of a truce between the government and the opposition. Lawmakers here in Washington calling on the international community to do more for refugees fleeing ISIS persecution. Wyatt Goolsby reports from Capitol Hill tonight.
Brian, members of the House didn't hold back this afternoon, saying ISIS' goal is to wipe out everyone who doesn't agree with their radical views, including Christians and Yazidis. So the question is, what can the U.S. government do to make sure the international community steps up? During a House hearing, New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith called the situation in the Middle East the largest displacement crisis in the world. 5 witnesses testified on the plight of religious minorities in the region. Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus, Carl Anderson, called on the U.S. government to prioritize vulnerable Christians and Yazidis to be part of the nation's refugee program. Chaldean Catholic Bishop Francis Calabat says Christians fleeing Syria are not getting the humanitarian help they need.
And find themselves more and more often as minorities in their own country, find themselves as second-class or third-class citizens at times. Not every time, but many, many times. And so one big thing that ISIS was able to do is completely destroy trust between neighbors, between friends, between the government itself.
We also heard from the head of the Yazidi Human Rights Organization International. The Yazidis are a small religious community living in Iraq and Syria, which have also been targeted by ISIS. Congressman Smith estimates roughly 300,000 refugees that entered Europe this year are from areas controlled by ISIS. He also went on to call it a genocide, and several other witnesses did as well. But they also noted that the Obama administration has not used the term genocide. Brian?
Thank you, Wyatt. Dr. Gregory Stanton, president of Genocide Watch, testified today at the congressional hearing. So you say this is worse than mass murders because these killers see this as religiously virtuous. Who is ISIS targeting and why?
They do. It is genocide. And the reason why they are targeting people for their religious beliefs is they consider them infidels. So Christians, Yazidis, Sabea Mandaeans, Shia Muslims, I mean, they consider Shia to be heretics and therefore they kill them. In fact, they killed over 2,000 Shia at one time when they took over Mosul. So, you know, it's a religious virtue because they see this as, they have an apocalyptic ideology. They believe this is near the end days of the world and that all those who participate in the killing are doing a virtuous thing. They will, if they have to become martyrs by blowing themselves up, they'll go straight to heaven. I mean, this is a, we haven't seen an ideology like this since Maoism.
So why is the U.S. so reluctant to call it genocide?
Well, I think there is a very important reason. The word genocide is a powerful word. Every other name that people give mass killing, you know, ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity and so forth, doesn't force them to act. We have done studies of this, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, for instance. What we found is anytime you find these weaker words, there's no action. When you have the word genocide used, then you begin to have action.
What kind of action can we take without trying to send troops into every one of these situations?
Well, of course, we are already acting in the sense of bombing ISIS, and I think that's quite justified in this case. And we're getting a lot of help from allies in doing that now. But, and I think the real important thing is to work in coalitions with our allies. That's why, even though the UN Security Council hasn't authorized anything, Chapter 8 of the UN Charter allows regional organizations like NATO or the Arab League or other organizations of that sort to actually take, you know, action. And I think that is the best way for us to help. We can train also local people because self-defense is still the best defense against genocide.
We'll get an update from you, I'm sure, in the future. Dr. Gregory Stanton, Genocide Watch, thank you for being with us.
Happy to be with you.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel is the first woman to be named Time magazine's Person of the Year in nearly 3 decades. Time says Merkel is chosen this year for helping to preserve and promote Europe despite economic turmoil and growing refugee crisis. She's also praised for being a principled manager and resolute diplomat. She is the first woman to receive the honor since Corazon Aquino of the Philippines in 1986. Coming up, pilgrims take an ancient route, walking from Tuscany to Rome to pass through the Vatican's Holy Door of Mercy. And Chicago's mayor apologizes for a police shooting, saying his city's police force needs complete and total reform. A depiction of St. Juan Diego from Guadalupe, the miracle and the message, airing on EWTN this Friday. On his feast day today, St. Juan Diego, pray for us. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick. 10 million people are expected to pass through the Vatican's Holy Door in a rite of pilgrimage during this Jubilee Year of Mercy. Some make quite a trek to get there, as Catherine Zeltner reports.
After a few pushes on the Holy Door at St. Peter's Basilica, Pope Francis launched the Year of Mercy. Special jubilees are celebrated about every 25 to 50 years, so these pilgrims didn't want to miss out. A group of Catholics left home in Tuscany, Italy Sunday to take an ancient route called the Via Francigena to Rome. 47-year-old Sandra Seminario is originally from Peru. Sandra's saying that for her, it's a path of reconciliation with God. The group crosses country paths and paved roads, stopping only to get a stamp on their credentials and food to refuel. For Manuel de Bellis, the 9 hours of walking each day is worth it. It's a historical moment, he says. When the group arrives in Rome, they pass through tight security checks and finally make it inside St. Peter's Square. Pilgrim Monica Seminario says it's a dream come true. For those who can't make it to Rome, Holy Doors will be opening at cathedrals starting this Sunday. Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine. A Baltimore police officer testifies in his own defense today. Officer William Porter says he did not see any signs of injury when he stopped a police van and talked to Freddie Gray. Gray injured his spine in the back of a police vehicle. He died a week later. His death sparked riots in Baltimore. Officer Porter is on trial for manslaughter, one of 6 officers facing charges in connection with that death. Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel apologizes for the 2014 killing of a black teenager by an officer. Laquan McDonald was shot 16 times by a white police officer who now faces first-degree murder charges. Mayor Emanuel tells City Council today the Chicago Police Department needs, quote, complete and total reform. This afternoon, thousands of protesters marched near Chicago City Hall. They were blocking traffic and demanding the mayor's resignation. The crowd that set out from Daley Plaza earlier in the afternoon was peaceful, but clearly angry. For 50 years, building strong values among Chicago's youth has been the focus of a program inspired by a saint. In 1965, a small group of Catholic Chicago business leaders recognized the need to help at-risk boys in the inner city. Midtown Educational Foundation and Metro Achievement Center now serve more than 1,000 boys and girls a year. A leader of the effort talked with us earlier this week. Glen Wilke, Executive Director of the Midtown Educational Foundation, is Skyping with us from Chicago. Glen, can you give us an idea of the goals of Midtown and Metro and how they've been accomplished over these past 50 years?
Yes, Brian. What we do is we take low-income, academically average students, not average at all, but average when they come to us, and we help them to get into good high schools, onto college, and then succeed through virtue and character and be the type of people you'd want to hire at EWTN.
Glen, could you briefly explain how the program that you have there in Chicago is really inspired by the teachings of Opus Dei founder St. Jose Maria Escrivá?
Yes, St. Jose Maria, who taught that holiness should be found in ordinary life in the middle of the world, whether you're in your company working in the afternoon on a Wednesday or you're at home with your children. He wanted that wherever Opus Dei was, if possible, to give back to that particular community. So in 1965, some members of Opus Dei, some other Catholic people, whoever they might have been, and then non-Catholics, started the Midtown Center for Boys in the near west side of Chicago. And his inspiration was that we would give them the human and, if they could understand it, supernatural formations so that they could be outstanding people and give back to the city of Chicago.
Like so many other major cities, there is a lot of violence in Chicago, especially in poor minority neighborhoods. How does Midtown and Metro help to prevent violence?
Well, we're right outside of those neighborhoods, on the south side and the west side. And our programs take these young people who are in these, many of them are in these gang-infested neighborhoods where all this violence is taking place. And we get them to study hard, to work hard, to love their parents, to build true friendships. And then when they do all of that, we'd like them not to leave the neighborhood, but to stay in the neighborhood and to give back, and many of them do. So in that regard, we're helping to stop and stem the violence that you're reading about throughout the country.
And that is a blessing. And happy 50th anniversary to the Midtown Educational Foundation. Glen Wilke, thanks for joining us by Skype from Chicago.
Brian, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
That conversation earlier this week. The president joins congressional leaders on Capitol Hill today, marking the anniversary of the ratification of the 13th Amendment. It abolished slavery in the U.S., and President Obama says Americans should push back against bigotry in all forms.
Is that our generation be willing to do what those who came before us have done, to rise above the cynicism and rise above the fear, to hold fast to our values.
The president recounted how slavery shaped the nation's politics and nearly tore it apart in the Civil War, saying the scars are still with us today. Up next, hoping to thwart terrorists, Congress acts to tighten visa requirements for entering the U.S. And 93-year-old Red Robinson recalls seeing the pilots in low-flying Japanese fighters attacking Pearl Harbor.
We must always look for the best that is in others.
Venerable Fulton Sheen from his network TV show Life is Worth Living. Today is the anniversary of Bishop Sheen's death in 1979. The great communicator was 84. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday, December 9th. I'm Brian Patrick. The House tightens controls on visa-free travel to the United States. The legislation passed today tightens the visa waiver program. Right now, citizens of 38 countries are permitted to be in the U.S. for up to 3 months without a visa. This bill requires anyone who's been in Iraq or Syria in the previous 5 years to apply for a visa. Exceptions are made for official government visits and military service. Riley Walters is with the Heritage Foundation. He researches national security and foreign policy. So this got overwhelming bipartisan support, but you say it's not that simple. Who will carry a burden for this?
So the people affected by this will be our friends and our allies. This will be the French or the German or the Italian missionaries or human aid workers or human rights workers or journalists who have been to Syria within the past 5 years.
That's interesting. So how can you strike a balance between national security and the personal freedom that we all seek?
This is not an easy question to answer, obviously, but what the visa waiver program does is it facilitates the very personal information people are willing to trade in order to travel to and from the United States. And it shares that with the intelligence community, who shares that with the United States between visa waiver program members, and secures our borders.
In your research, what would you say is the best scenario for the visa waiver program?
The best scenario would be to avoid anything that constrains, hinders, or negatively affects the visa waiver program, such as deciding who can and can't actually be a part of the visa waiver program, or other things such as 30-day wait periods, or even making people give biometric information prior to any travel.
How are other countries handling this?
Well, other countries such as the EU or our Asian friends, they certainly have their own national security strategies. But what we might see is certainly reciprocal action from visa waiver program members. So what we might see in the future is American missionaries or humanitarian aid workers or humanitarian rights workers or journalists no longer eligible for the visa waiver program in their travels to VWP countries.
So there could be repercussions. All right, Riley Walters with the Heritage Foundation. Thanks so much for being with us, Riley.
Thank you.
And the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor 74 years ago this week stunned the nation. Tonight, Jason Calvi visits with a veteran who lived to tell the tale.
It's a sad situation, right?
93-year-old Dale Red Robinson was near Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941.
A date which will live in infamy.
One plane came over so low, right over the quadrangle. You could see the pilot. Looked like he was grinning. Yeah, I can still see him. And I'm still cussing him.
The sneak attack propelled the United States into World War II. Ted Waller enlisted the next day.
It gave me a chance to join the Navy and go fight the war, be a hero.
Right there? Yep, right there.
This week, these World War II vets are visiting the nation's capital, the greatest generation.
Thank you for your service.
And while Red loves to laugh, he has a solemn mission. Saluting the 2,400 Americans killed 74 years ago and remembering his fellow soldiers, all now gone.
Well, I thought of all my buddies. Brought back a lot of memories and their families.
Red shares war stories with other World War II vets, like 90-year-old Laura Mays.
I believe that our good Lord has caused us to get through a lot of this.
Honor Flight Dallas brought them to D.C. to visit the war memorials.
And there is your memorial.
Red returns to Texas knowing his service has not been forgotten.
Well, thank you for your service.
At the National World War II Memorial, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
God bless those courageous servants. Until tomorrow, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. We say goodnight with a glimpse of Christmas decorations outside the West Wing at the White House. Good night and God bless you.